Do you have SI joint pain? What if I threw you off a building? I'll show you what happened in a second, but first, to the back cave. If your back pain is located right here, and especially off to one side, it might be SI joint or sacroiliac joint pain. And maybe you've been told that your SI joint might be out of place or rotated or even slipped. Well, is this just another outdated myth, or is there some truth to it? Let me tell you about my patient Liz, who had SI joint pain for years. Now, she was told that her joint was out of place and that she needed constant adjustments to put it back. But these are lies, big fat lies. Now, the SI joint can certainly hurt. In fact, it likely contributes to between 10 and 38% of low back pain cases. But the belief that the SI joint is fragile and constantly goes out of place is a harmful, outdated myth. So today we're going to dive into the truth about the SI joint, debunk common misconceptions, and explain how knowledge and strength empowered Liz to overcome years of chronic pain. I'm Dr. Anthony Davis, and I empower people with chronic back pain and sciatica to reclaim the active life they love. Now let's bust these myths and get you feeling better. Let's start with a bit of anatomy. The two sacroiliac joints are made up of the sacrum and the two ilia. Essentially, it's where the bottom of the spine connects to the pelvis. Now, this joint is surrounded by a network of very strong ligaments and muscles that provide support and stability. Now, the SI joint only moves a few degrees or a few millimeters. Its primary job is stability and strength. Now, it's not fused, but it's close. It is one of the toughest joints in the human body. Now, to give you an idea, what if we were to throw you off of a building? You'd have broken bones, shoulder dislocations, and a ton of other emergency injuries, but your SI joint would probably be fine. Now, the SI joint can certainly cause back pain, but even if you have pain, it's important to remember that the actual joint is most likely not severely damaged, and it's not out of place. It's just sensitive or inflamed. Now, this is kind of like how a paper cut hurts like crazy, even though it's actually just a very minor injury. Now, all this information is taught in a basic anatomy class, and I'm an anatomy teacher as well as a doctor. But for some reason, many healthcare providers perpetuate fragility myths that are not scientific, and these beliefs can cause harm to patients. First up, your SI joint does not go out of place. Now, your chiropractor or physical therapist may have told you otherwise, but they are wrong. Adjustments do not change the position of the SI joint. Now, some of you have seen videos telling you that your pelvis is rotated or has an upslip, but on this channel we believe in science, and I tried really hard to find any peer-reviewed research talking about true malposition of the SI joint, and surprise, surprise, I could only find blog posts and opinion pieces. I couldn't find a single scientific study. So while these complicated biomechanical explanations might make the presenter sound really smart, it turns out they're all just making stuff up. I want to repeat, there is zero evidence for the SI joint being misaligned or for so-called correction of that alignment. So remember, the SI joint is a very strong, fibrous joint that doesn't move very much. The only way that the SI joint would be truly out of place is if you fell from an airplane and didn't have a parachute. And then if you did survive, well, the SI joint would be the least of your concerns. Do you have SI joint pain? What if I threw you off a building? Look at this. You'd be in shambles. A dislocated shoulder, a broken arm. Look, he's falling apart. But the SI joint is the strongest joint in the body. You don't need to worry about it. It's the last thing that you need to worry about going out of place. What's interesting is that believing that your joints are out of place actually causes more harm than any structural issue would. That's because research shows that fear of pain is more disabling than pain itself. Like with my patient Liz, who was told that her SI joint kept going out of place. So she started to view her back as fragile, and she became dependent on her chiropractor to quote-unquote put it back in place. And then after getting her joints realigned, which is not a real thing, Liz would avoid anything that stressed her back because she was afraid that moving wrong would make it quote-unquote go out again. So she quit working out, she stopped hiking, and she even became afraid to pick up her own kids. So I really want to reiterate the research showing that spinal adjustments do not change joint position of the SI joint. And frustratingly, the research shows that the types of activity Liz was avoiding were exactly the things she should have been doing to fix her back pain. Liz's story is a great example of how harmful medical misinformation can be. But let's be clear, that doesn't mean that spinal adjustments or mobilizations are bad. For Liz, she did get temporary relief, which is great. It wasn't a long-term solution, and we definitely don't want to have that fearful out-of-place narrative, because that did make her worse. But the technique of spinal mobilization or adjustments on their own are completely fine. Studies show that spinal manipulation can provide temporary pain relief, but just remember that it does not change joint position and it does not replace strength exercise. So if you like getting your back cracked, just make sure that you're also exercising and making other healthy lifestyle changes. I'm going to go into a lot more detail on the treatment in part 2 of this video. So make sure that you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for notifications so that you get notified when part 2 comes out. Now let's talk about anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. People get worried that they have excessive pelvic tilt and that this is going to impact low back pain or SI joint pain. Now this idea was largely introduced by Vladimir Janda with his idea of lower crossed syndrome, where he suggested that weak abs and weak glutes combined with a tight low back and tight hip flexors would cause unnecessary pressure in the low back or the SI joint. However, this study shows that people with and without low back pain have the same amount of pelvic tilt. In other words, pelvic tilt doesn't matter. In fact, in a pain-free population, 91% of males and 82% of females had some type of pelvic tilt, with an anterior pelvic tilt being much more common. We also have studies showing that an anterior pelvic tilt is not associated with weak glutes or tight hip flexors. Beyond that, it's based on the idea of reciprocal inhibition, where a tight muscle will inhibit the antagonist or opposite muscle and make it weak. But this idea has been widely questioned in the research. For example, if reciprocal inhibition were a real thing, then when we try to stretch the hamstrings, then squeezing the quads should theoretically turn off the hamstring. But this study found the opposite, that squeezing the quads resulted in more electrical or EMG activity of the hamstring. So muscles co-contract. They don't just have on-off switches. In other words, Janda was wrong. And not just Janda though. Some of you are probably wondering about methods like PRI, which is Postural Restoration Institute, and clearly based on the research that I've shared, PRI and other methods are frankly absolute garbage, waste of money. Now I tried to find research on PRI, but the only thing that was available were a couple of case studies, and that barely counts as research anyway, so I'm not even going to count that. I did find a literature review comparing some other postural rehab methods like McKenzie, Feldenkrais, and global postural rehabilitation, and basically all of them seem to get about the same outcomes. And that's because the key with any of these methods is that we're getting you moving. So any exercise that appropriately challenges you is going to get you some type of results. You don't have to get really complicated corrective exercises to get you better. Now, unfortunately, Liz believed that correcting her pelvic tilt was crucial for her recovery. So before seeing me, she wasted countless hours doing corrective exercises aimed at fixing her posture. And these exercises were just way too easy for her. They got her nowhere, because these easy posture correction exercises did nothing to get her whole body truly strong enough to hike and lift weights, play pickleball, and pick up her kids. So once we taught her that, pelvic tilt really doesn't need to be corrected, it's normal, and we replaced her postural exercises with a customized full body strength routine and some other things that we'll talk about in part 2, she quickly recovered. All right, let's wrap up. So understanding the truth about the SI joint and dispelling these myths is an absolute game changer. It was for Liz, and it has been for many of my patients, right? Because they believe these myths and misconceptions, and these ideas are keeping them stuck trying to fix an unfixable problem that didn't matter in the first place. Like where Liz had a little bit of temporary relief from adjustments, but ultimately got worse because she was avoiding any type of movement she thought was gonna throw it out of place. But when we did a comprehensive rehabilitation plan that included strength training, stress reduction, lifestyle change, and education, that's when she really started to bounce back. And that plan started with learning about the SI joint and dispelling some of these harmful, outdated myths. Now, I'm going to explain the entire treatment plan that we did for Liz in part 2 of this video series. But if this is resonating with you and you want personalized help managing your back pain, then check out the free masterclass in the description. And if you like what you learn, you can always book a free call with me. So go watch the masterclass for a deep dive on back pain and sciatica, and then part 2 of this video series is going to appear on your screen as soon as it's published. See you there.